The first benchmark for the upcoming Zen 5 9800X3D from AMD has just surfaced, not long after the reviews of Intel's newest generation of high-end desktop CPUs were published, of course. It's almost as if AMD was waiting for the Core Ultra 200's Arrow Lake-based processors from Intel to be launched for Lisa Su's team to counter with what is, effectively, their next-gen CPUs. Well, Intel didn't really need their frenemy AMD to ruin their launch celebrations for Arrow Lake with the X3D Zen 5 CPUs, as the Blue Giant did a really good job of self-sabotaging with what is probably the worst CPU launch in Intel's history. Well, I guess second worst after the Itanium. But as always, it's easy to miss the forest for the trees, and that's a valid reason Intel brought these transitional CPUs to market, as you'll see. The imminent launch of the X3D Zen 5 CPUs will be the nail in the desktop coffin for Intel. I think that's a given for this generation. But does that really matter for either company? And in more practical terms, is there a scenario where either Arrow Lake or Zen 5 X3D might be good buys for us PC enthusiasts? Well, let's dive in. UR keys are having a Halloween Super Sale, so if you need a Windows or Office OEM key, you should check them out now. What is an OEM key? If you buy Windows 11 directly from Microsoft, you'll pay $139 currently, or more depending on your region, and that's for a Home Edition key. But if you buy an OEM key from urcdkeys.com, you'll only have to pay $21.80 when you use my coupon code C25, and that's for a Windows 11 Pro key. These keys work globally and you'll get them within minutes. You can pay with a credit card or PayPal. After purchasing, just go to your purchased orders page and copy the key, and then on your Windows 11 install, type in activate and enter your key in the appropriate field and click activate. Simple and quick. You can also get Office 2021 Professional Plus at less than half the price with my coupon code C25. Check the links in the video description for your cheap OEM keys today. Going through the launch reviews for Arrow Lake, one thing is clear: Intel has made a mess out of this launch. Not only are the performance numbers not good for the most part, especially in gaming workloads, but also the Windows compatibility is as poor as the Zen 4 X3D launch, if not worse. It wasn't that long ago that the 7950 X3D from AMD launched to a very poor reception because of the way Windows deals with its non-3D die, and the same seems to be true for Arrow Lake. These are the heterogeneous design's growing pains, but I think there's more to this story than just Windows compatibility. Someone actually ran the 285K with only one P-core enabled and 16 E-cores enabled. Yeah, one performance core only. And the performance was better in both Cyberpunk 2077 and Baldur's Gate 3 when only one P-core was enabled, rather than all 8 cores. Without more information, I would imagine that the games are jumping from P-core to E-core when all of them are enabled, causing massive drops in frame rates. At least that's one possibility. You see, in the first 3 CPUs with hybrid cores, so that's Alder Lake, Raptor Lake and Meteor Lake, the cores were sat along the ring bus sharing L3 cache. So for instance, in Meteor Lake's microarchitecture, so that's the 14900K for example, the P-cores are sequentially coupled with access to the shared 36 megabytes of L3 cache, which meant that if you disabled the E-cores, you had a speedy 8-core gaming CPU that had no ring stops bottlenecked by the slower E-cores. This bus facilitates the communication between cores within the die. While in theory this heterogeneous configuration makes sense for power efficiency, the core-to-core transfers within an E-core cluster take longer than crossing cluster boundaries, because you need a full round trip on the ring. With only P-cores enabled, since they are sequential, there's no latency increase. And even if the E-cores are enabled, you have the 8 cores within the same bus cycle one after the other. The main problem with this configuration is that the buses have power limitations, so the E-cores will become a bandwidth bottleneck because they are lower power. Even though since Sandy Bridge the Intel bus can do 32 bytes per cycle, the E-cores on Meteor Lake could only do 16 bytes. The fact that the P-cores do 32 bytes per cycle and are all clustered together create a cluster fudge of heat all concentrated in that area of the package. Now comparing that to the newly launched Arrow Lake topology, while it continues the tile-based approach that was introduced in Meteor Lake, we see that the P-cores and E-cores are not sequential, they alternate, or rather are interspersed, where you have one Lion Cove P-core followed by a cluster of Skymont E-cores, then two P-cores again, then another 4 E-core cluster, and then another P-core, and the same in the bottom row. The reason Intel did this is for better heat distribution, so that the P-cores are not creating a concentrated heat spot. And also this configuration offers a lot more flexibility in manufacturing these family of chips, but as a trade-off introduced some problems with core-to-core communication that will impact latency-sensitive workloads like gaming. And even beyond core-to-core communication, the fact that the memory is disaggregated, and you can see here that the memory controller is not on the same die as the cores, it's on the I/O die, adds about 15 to 20 nanoseconds of latency to memory compared to Meteor Lake. So in instances where there is a cache miss, you will see added latency, and that is especially true in gaming. The fact that data needs to be fetched from another die inevitably adds latency. But going back to the core-to-core communication, you might remember that Intel introduced something called the Thread Director, which by the way was covered in the old Cortex website when it was still in patent form. I'll put a link to an archive of that in the video description. Thread Director is still used in Arrow Lake, and its purpose is to optimally assign tasks to the appropriate cores. While the way it's supposed to work is that at runtime, this thread director inside the chip provides feedback to Windows on how to schedule threads for either performance or efficiency. By default, it will direct tasks to utilize the P-cores in order to maximize performance. And once all P-cores are maximized, it then starts prioritizing which tasks should run on which core and begins delegating tasks to the E-cores. So in a game, it will by default put the main render thread and other critical threads on the P-cores, and use the E-cores for other tasks only when needed. So Windows is supposed to check which tasks are on the foreground and which are running on the background, and will direct the background ones to the E-cores. So what seems to be happening in Arrow Lake is that, like with the 12th gen CPUs when the thread director was introduced, foreground tasks are getting stuck on the E-cores. So in the example where only one P-core is enabled, Windows is scheduling all gaming processes to one P-core, and all background tasks are being assigned to the E-cores. So it's working as intended, even though there's only one performance core available to the game. If you are getting lost, basically it's faster to have only one performance core maxed out, handling all of the game critical processes, and the remaining E-cores handling everything else, than it is to have 8 P-cores where some of the critical game processes are on the E-cores, and some of the background tasks are on the P-cores. Hopefully that makes sense. So you would think that simply disabling all of the E-cores would fix things, but as of the making of this video, that isn't the case. And that can be due to Windows not working properly in this way, or it can just be an issue with the thread director, similar to what we saw with 12th gen. If you recall the 12900K reviews, there were games where disabling the E-cores improved performance like Doom Eternal, but other games where the performance was better with the E-cores enabled, like Civ 6. Now, I didn't get an Arrow Lake sample, so I'm not sure if setting core affinity on a case-by-case basis helps performance or not, or if any of this analysis is correct, to be honest. But regardless, no user should be disabling cores or setting core affinity to get the best performance out of its CPU, or in some cases just to get it to work. Adding to these issues, you have the fact that the ring bus is now running at slower speeds, so you have higher latency in accessing L3 cache. And this is visible in the Factorio benchmark, which tests L3 and the memory subsystem. And of course, unlike this newly launched Arrow Lake microarchitecture, Zen 5 is now more mature and better utilized by the OS and by games. So all of these factors contribute to a worsening of gaming performance in Arrow Lake. So why on earth did Intel decide to design the microarchitecture like this? Well, like I said earlier, having this new arrangement of P-cores and E-cores has optimized heat distribution, and lowering the ring bus clocks also reduces energy usage. So this is clearly a design aimed at efficiency. And note that the GPU being separated from the CPU tile means that it can be built on the most advanced node while keeping everything else the same. It also means that Intel can decide to add additional NPU capability without needing a significant redesign of the entire chip. So what this all means is that Intel made the CPU cores in Arrow Lake as versatile as possible, with a focus on efficiency and a fully dedicated ring bus so that it can adapt to a variety of tiles it adds to the rest of the package. I would assume that over time, working with Microsoft, Intel can improve somewhat the P-core utilization for gaming workloads in Windows. From their perspective, the sacrifice in gaming performance is probably worth it, seeing that as far as this new generation is concerned, the focus will be on specialization rather than single-core IPC. Was it the right decision to design Arrow Lake like this? Personally, I actually think Intel is on the right track, and Arrow Lake seems to be sort of a foundation for the next generation of truly heterogeneous tile-based CPUs. It's a transitional microarchitecture, and I will cover some new patterns that have emerged that show how Intel will be adding to the thread director in order to make these sorts of designs more performant in future generations. On the positive side, when things work, Arrow Lake seems to be excellent, and by things working, I'm talking about Cinebench, which is not saying much. Now, if you look at this new generation from Intel as a platform, it could be a really good option for those who stress the I/O on their systems, populating all M.2 slots and maximizing USB usage with external devices and so on. Both AM4 and AM5 on the AMD side, at least in my experience, have been terrible in this regard. AMD's CPUs are great if all you plan to do is run one GPU and maybe a couple of M.2 drives, and that's that. But once you start saturating the I/O on AMD's platforms, the system completely shits the bed, becoming unstable and dropping connections left and right. So if your priority is populating all the CPU and chipset lanes, Arrow Lake might actually be a great platform. I almost want to call this sort of a Threadripper type of CPU. If you are primarily a gamer though, avoid Arrow Lake like the plague and get a 7800X3D instead, or a 12900K and disable all of its E-cores. As for AMD's 9000X3D variants, which will be launching roughly a week from now on the 7th of November, or rather the 9800X3D, which I think will be the only SKU available, we already got a couple of leaks ahead of launch. Firstly, as reported by videocards.com, a European price comparison website for retailers published the full specs for the 9800X3D, which features a turbo clock of 5.2 GHz, a TDP of 120 watts, unlocked overclocking as suggested by the free multiplier, which if you recall wasn't possible on the previous generations, or there was only limited overclocking available. And in fact, we've already seen a leak before of the 9800X3D running at 5.6 GHz all-core with precision overdrive. So while the 7800X3D was locked to 5 GHz when overclocking, it seems that the follow-up, the 9800X3D, can put out an additional 700 MHz when overclocked. It's hard to say if that will translate into actual performance though, as in the past, overclocking AMD's recent Ryzen CPUs has typically only yielded 1 or 2% in performance. The second leak came a few days ago, also reported by Videocards, which confirms a higher boost clock of 5.2 GHz thanks to better thermal performance, which by the way might have to do with the fact that the 3D cache is now on the bottom of the CCD instead of on top of it. However, this slide suggests that the performance increase in games compared to the 7800X3D is a mere 8%. So better thermals and higher clocks, and the additional IPC from the Zen 5 microarchitecture, and all you get is an 8% improvement. That seems very strange to me, but if that's the case, then even the Zen 5 X3D chips will be a skip, making the whole Zen 5 generation basically pointless, given that that you can get the 7000s for less money and get similar performance. I mean, if getting the 7800X3D means you only lose 8% performance, assuming these leaks are correct, then what's the point of spending more money? Even if the final launch price of the 9800X3D is something like, say, $50 more than what the 7800X3D is going for right now, is it really worth it? Unless the overclocking really makes a huge difference, and the price difference is minimal, I don't see how the 9800X3D will appeal to anyone, but I could be wrong. Whatever the case may be, if you're a gamer, it's AMD or AMD now. You just buy either the 5800X3D or the 7800X3D, or maybe there's a reason to buy the 9800X3D that we don't know yet, and you are good to go. Just DIY your machine and install Windows and play games. Because on the Intel side, unless you want to spend 10x more time fiddling about in the BIOS and setting core affinities in Windows rather than actually playing games, you will be wasting your money when it comes to anything that's latency sensitive. Like I said, there will be cases where Arrow Lake might make sense, but that's mostly down to the AMD platform being terrible for those who need all the PCI lanes and all the USBs. But other than that admittedly niche use case, AMD is owning Intel on the desktop. As far as mobile though, and anything where efficiency might matter, we'll see if Intel's strategy of disaggregated tiles pans out. Well, it might not even matter if Qualcomm does indeed buy Intel, but that's a topic for another video. A huge thanks to my patrons for their continued support. If you like independent analysis that connects all the dots and helps you make better investment decisions, consider supporting my work by becoming a patron today for just a couple of dollars per month. If you can't contribute right now, then please share this video, like and subscribe to the channel, as that really helps. Thanks for watching, and until the next one.